Thank you for taking the time to invite me. Going to be quite quick because obviously you guys are obviously wanting to finish off. My name is Nigel Lambert, and in short I want to quickly take you through the sort of background of EC funding. So I want to talk through myself, give you an idea of the context of the funds, and give you some secrets of what I've learned over the last 15 years. Bit of background, I'm a physicist, and I've been involved with this sort of area for about 15 years now, and in some point in time I've written successful applications in all these areas, mainly in medical and biotech, but also a lot of ecological areas and so forth, so I can talk on the subject with some level of authority. Okay, so very, very, very important. If I tell anybody anything, it's important to understand the funds and the background of the funds. And what I think a key thing I want to say to people is that the reason why the European Commission funds research it may be very different to what you think it is. So, for example, these are the big issues that the European Commission is bothered about. The European Commission is bothered about the demographics of our society in Europe. They're bothered about huge environmental stresses and environmental issues to do with Europe. One of their biggest concerns that many people fail to realise is Europe is probably one of the most uncompetitive places in the world to do any kind of research, sadly, because we are very expensive. So the European Commission is very aware that research is sadly not going to do well in the future because of the cost price of actually doing the research here. So it's very important to understand that you may have your research interests or your project interests, but the European Commission sees the world very differently to yourselves. And you must remember this when you apply for funding. Okay? So, generally speaking, I want to just give you another picture of funding. So, if you imagine funding in a large two-dimensional space, the maturity of the funding along this axis here, so exploratory research, empirical research, application development, product development, at this point here, you get to a point when you can make money from a particular idea, research, concept. Here is the sort of grant values in question. There's a very large number of funding programs actually around Europe, but also in the UK and around the world, and they're all, largely speaking, fit in different parts of that continuum. What's very important is there are underlying reasons why those funds exist, and they fit within a bigger picture. So, for example, funds at this side of the diagram are actually about funds to support the research base, to actually keep the research base functional and operational. Funds in this region down here tend to be along the idea maturity and tend to be about generating new businesses and generating new wealth. Funds in the top area are about innovation, new jobs, treating issues of society, and so on and so forth. And finally, there are funds now in this area which are more market-focused, which are about changing how systems operate, how we generate power, how we may treat certain cancers. And what's critically important is when you come in with an idea, you must understand where your idea fits within this two-dimensional space. If you fit the wrong part, you're fundamentally out of the funding body's remit. And so you're knocking on the wrong door. Knocking on the wrong door is the single most biggest error most of my people I work with do. So big message for today is please understand where you are with your particular interests at that particular time, not only in terms of the value of the project, but in terms of the maturity of your idea. So if you listen to anything today, it's listen to that shot. Okay. So, just to explain, some of the funds I'm going to mainly talk about, I'm not going to talk about, but the key funds I work with are European Research Council, the Eurostars, part of Eureka, but by far the biggest is Framework 7, which I'm sure you may have heard of. Okay, simplistically speaking, there are two main sorts of funds to bear in mind. One's called non-thematic. That means it is not based on a particular subject. The actual application is all about fitting being in a certain place at the right time, i.e. being the right kind of partner that the Commission wants to fund and support. The other kinds of funds are thematic. So here, this is actually a fund based on a policy decision. So here the European Commission say they want to design and support new stem cell research. there will be a topic around that. And so, again, another important decision in your process is, would you like to target non-thematic or thematic funds? Because that has a very different approach. Okay. Another reason I find people frequently apply for funding in very different reasons. There's different reasons why you can apply for funds. There's usually the most common is getting access to different skill sets. I very much back up the first presenter that was talking about the size of the teams now, having to have the statistician working with the clinician, working with the sort of genetic specialist. And this is a very common reason to do it. But also funding, if you apply for funding, usually you are resource constrained or you're financially restrained. But also a lot of people do these funds because they want to actually deliberately expose themselves to new networks. Okay, so what I'm trying to do now is I'm not going to give you a parrot fashion explanation of how you go about applying for funding. You can get that from the website. So I'm trying to give you some of the underlying strategy about how to go about applying for EC funding. These are some of the key points I would like you to remember from my presentation. The first important point is the quality of your idea and the suitability to the funding body. Back to my two-dimensional map. Do you fit within the funding area that the funding body wishes to fund? Partners. Most of the funding funds I talk about require collaboration. The quality of the partners is important. Cohesive consortium. Please don't put a consortium together that is 3 of your best friends because you want to go to Brussels for some meetings. That's not a good idea. You want a consortium that is very sensible and can deliver the concept idea proposed. A good project plan. Bear in mind there's strategic issues when you're going for very large EC funds. Your financial plan has to be very solid. But also, another thing that's very important, and I again support the first caller, is presentation to the funding body is critical because the funding body may have a very different experience and skill sets to yourself. Finally, don't ignore the rules and policies. Many applicants do. Okay, so developing ideas. One thing I often say to people when they're new to this process is there are a number of key things you need to do in terms of developing concepts idea that are suitable for the EC funding. First of all, identify your own personal objectives, identify what you want to achieve from the funds themselves, and then identify the particular funds that are best suited to them. As I said, there are many, many funds out there, and they come along at different times, they come along in different sizes and shapes, so it's important to do some preparation and identify your particular interests and objectives in light of the funding programs. Develop your concepts. Always, always make your ideas fit the fund. Do not, I repeat, ever try to make the fund fit your ideas. That is always a bad thing to do, and I've seen people try to do that. You can only do that if your brother-in-law is the reviewer. And again, I've seen that happen. Try to embrace collaboration. Public bodies always like collaboration. Collaboration is seen as a critical part of any kind of innovation. So make sure you have collaborative networks in development such that when programs come along, you can start to hit them with collaboration. Also, understand that you must, to provide the funding body what they want, the funding body doesn't want the research. The funding body wants the impact from your research. They want the outcomes from the program. So work very carefully on understanding how your particular research interests will actually be translated into actual outcomes that the funding body wants to invest in. Finally, and very importantly, please seek the reviews of others. It's very important early on in your ideas to speak to other people because those other people will always strengthen your ideas. Okay, so what I'm trying to do now is take you through some key elements that I think are very important. I've tried to put these into a structure that will be useful for you. So understanding the funding body is critical, and I'll repeat the point again. Understand that there is a strategy and there are competitors out there, particularly for large-scale EC funds. Understand how your ideas and make sure they're very strong and very relevant. And another key point is clear presentation, and I'll quickly talk through these points. So understanding the funding body. Typically what the funding body does is they have a call. So what they've done is there's been a process whereby they've specified a call there's been a lobbying process, there's been a process of policy decision, and then a call is issued. And it's important to learn how to understand these calls, taking into point that the understanding of that call may differ depending on who you are. So for example, taking a very simplistic example, the funding body is here and he wants a four-wheeled vehicle. And you've got a number of people around him that may have different opinions of what a four-wheeled vehicle is. Please bear in mind that the actual guy in the middle, the funding body, might have a very, very particular interpretation of what a four-wheeled vehicle is. So your main advice I could say to you is try to read beyond that and understand what the funding body actually really wants. What is the context? What is the subtext behind that? I apologise if it sounds like it's being deceptive or secretive. It's actually, in truth, the funding body has different motives to yourself. They often have a bigger picture. They often want to do different things. So it's important to interpret that. And again, this issue is probably the biggest mistake people make, is they fail to really understand the importance of particular elements of the funding body. Or, another big common problem is they try to make their own objectives. They try to pull their own objectives out of what the funding body wishes to fund. In short, they want to be this person here when the funding body wants to be that person there, which is unfortunate, but you have to make sure you're in that right camp. Another thing, as I've said before, I'm repeating myself a little bit, is please understand where you are on this structure. Please understand the scale and scope of the project you're going to be. If you apply with a concept idea here, in this area here, regardless of how good your idea is, it'll fail. So I can't stress that enough. The best ideas in the world will fall out of remit because these people in this particular space are bothered about their own individual slot in that funding area, if you understand. Okay, strategies and competitors. It's very important to understand if you're going for large-scale EC funding, it is a competitive process. In generally speaking, you have to think strategically about who are those people around you. So think strategically. Try to understand where you are within a particular field. I myself have a background in diagnostics, and there are a number of different ways of doing diagnosis of the skin for my particular area, which was researching on skin tumours. So for give an example, you can detect a skin tumour in many different ways using very different sorts of radiation. Try to understand which of those different sorts of groups with those different key elements of technologies you might be up against. There's no harm in being competing with these people, you just need to be the best of that particular group, if you understand. Be prepared to modify your ideas. If you do understand who your competition is going to be, it might be an opportunity for you to modify your ideas to put some distance between you and your competitor. If you understand who your main competitor may be, most EC funds will typically fund more than one or two projects. So there's no harm in actually you can still be compatible, but it's not good to be openly in competition with a strong competitor. As I said before, as I've repeated many times, also please understand the motives of the funding body can often be very different to yourself. The key thing to remember is there are different stakeholders in this process. There's your partners, there's yourself, and then there's the reviewer and the funder. And these are different people. The fund body themselves see the world very differently to the reviewers, and these issues all have to be taken into consideration when you apply. Okay, strong, relevant ideas. I've basically got this logic structure to sort of demonstrate the point. Basically, it's always important to apply for funds when you have a strong justification. It's based on filling out these bubbles. You should always have yourself with some partners, and you should have some existing focus today, whether it be research, whether it be a commercial company. And you have some key, new, great idea for the future, which is ambitious. And the idea itself will take you into some new future or some new application. The fund itself, it's important to identify a technical barrier. So it may seem like an odd thing to say, but when you're applying for funding, you're not actually applying for the money. It's about identifying a barrier, and the funding is all about overcoming that to achieve this step change. So to give you an example, it's very important to have the right thing in these bubbles, because if you don't have these things in these bubbles, writing the application is extremely difficult. And no amount of, how we say in English, BS, will cover over that problem. So you always have to have these issues covered. One thing I also like to say to people in terms of good presentation is please understand, a bit like the first speaker, is that presentation is key. And largely speaking, with EC documentation, this is a sales document first. It is not. It is only a scientific or clinical document afterwards. So I often say to many people that you must understand that your proposal actually has two jobs. The first job is a sales job, selling your ideas to the funding body. The second level of the job is actually about credibility and the more scientific elements. So ensure the data is rapidly accessible. Key messages must be marketed and sold to the funding body. Get across these messages. Give the reviewer key memorable messages so they can retain them. Make it convenient for the reviewer to find the information they need. And then later on, the next part of the document is this credibility level which you have to provide. Without this process, again, it's very difficult to make it easy for the reviewer to pass your project. And so a common phrase we have in my area is keep the reviewer happy. Thank you very much.